Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 5 of the Toronto International Film Festival. How's everyone doing? Fantastic. My name is Keith Benny. I'm the Senior Director of Audience and Community here at Tiff. Fresh off of the premiere of The Good Nurse last evening, we are so honored to be in conversation with the film's star, Eddie Redmayne. As you join us today, we encourage you to reflect the land that we're on and its history. We're located on the treaty lands and territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. The territory is within the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant and is home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. We are grateful to work on this land, and we are grateful to show the work of Indigenous filmmakers here at TIFF year-round. I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who supports what we do here at TIFF. Our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, Bulgari, and Visa for their continued support. Thank you to our public supporters, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, Telefilm Canada, and the City of Toronto. Thank you, of course, to our members and donors and supporters for championing TIFF to transform the way people see the world through film. It's been a challenging 2 years producing this film festival from home, so we're very excited to be back with all of you in cinema. So thank you for coming to TIFF and thank you for supporting our work. So the reason we're here this afternoon, Eddie Redmayne is a master at connecting audiences with the emotional truth of his characters. On screen, he brought vulnerability to early and memorable roles in The Good Shepherd and Les Miserables. But it was in The Theory of Everything, which was here at TIFF in 2014, where he delivered his spellbinding performance as famed scientist Stephen Hawking. The role earned him an Academy Award for Best Actor and demonstrated his commitment to physically and emotionally inhabiting a character's world. Most recently, Redmayne was a key member of the outstanding ensemble in Aaron Sorkin's The Trial of the Chicago 7. And just this year, he earned an Olivier Award as the Emcee in the electrifying West End revival of Cabaret. At the festival this year, he's here with The Good Nurse. He steps into the shoes of Charles Cullen, a former RN who was confirmed to be responsible for the deaths of 29 people, but they expect it was more like 400 patients within his care. The Good Nurse had its premiere last evening. Redmayne and his co-star Jessica Chastain are electric and riveting in their roles, and the film is incredibly tense and gripping and an indictment of the healthcare system that allowed Cullen to get away for so long. As we saw last night in each of Redmayne's performances, there are moments you forget you're watching an actor. He sinks so deeply into the role. This is a testament to his skill, to his dedication, to his talent. We're so lucky to have him here with us today for this intimate chat and to hear from one of the finest actors working today. Please join me in welcoming Eddie Redmayne.
Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Hey, guys. Hey. Thank you. God, I love you guys. You're amazing. That was incredibly generous. Thank you.
I would say that I think we all think you're very generous for sharing your talents on screen, but also for joining us here today to talk a little bit about craft, because you're an actor. I think that all of us, when we watch you, there's something magnetic in your performances. So to learn a little bit more about how you do what you do is such a gift.
Thank you. I will try my best.
So maybe to start, I mean, welcome back to Toronto. You've been here, by my count, with 5 films now, going back to 2011 with a film called Hick. Mm-hmm. You've had some really memorable moments here. I wonder what last night felt like for you premiering the film.
Toronto is the festival that I've been to the most. It's the festival I feel the most affiliation with. I love the audiences here, and the whole festival experience feels like it's something I've missed hugely. And when we did The Trial of the Chicago 7, I think that's a film that may have gone to festivals, but we ended up sort of promoting it from home on these Zoom calls, and only yesterday and these past couple of days I've been out and about meeting cinema goers here, going to meeting all the people, sort of the people who are sort of involved in the industry here, I've realised how much I've taken it for granted, and it is so extraordinary to be back with real live audiences, and yeah, so. And I'm trying to. So it feels fresh. This festival this year. It feels like a new experience to me, and I was thrilled to be coming with a film that I'm proud of, because it's not always the case. And secrets. And I have been to Toronto with 5 films, and not all of them are very good. But you win some and you lose some, and they're different films for different audiences, and that is also something that I love about this festival. It celebrates such diversity of films. So.
Well, The Good Nurse is one of those films that's incredible and amazing, and so we'll talk about it in a moment. But I do want to connect it to your journey as an actor. One of the things that I think resonates clearly in your work is that you have a seemingly innate ability to inhabit a character, to step inside of them. And so I'm wondering where that comes from, or could you trace that back to something early as a kid? Did you like to perform? Did you like to act?
I've always loved acting, as long as I can remember. I think I found my way into acting through music. I don't come from an acting background. There's no one in my family who particularly has an interest in it, but I had an instinct for sort of singing when I was little. And through that, I kind of found theatre. When I was... I'm so sorry, I've just got to remove this. Sorry.
Throw it behind you.
Oh, that was very... it's a weird... Oh, shit.
It's gone.
It's gone. Yeah, sorry.
You're a magician as well.
Oh, the magician, and I've now got one here that's kind of more comfortable. I basically got a part in this production directed by Sam Mendes, who's here at the festival this year, of Oliver, a famous British musical. Yes, it's a great. It is a great musical, and I was in Oliver. For people that don't know, there are loads of children in it, and I got cast as one of the, I think, 100 children in this, and what it meant was that I could leave maths class on a kind of a sort of rainy Thursday, just sort of step up and walk out and say bye to my friends and go and get on the tube in London and go to the London Palladium, one of the most beautiful old theatres in London. And there was a romance to that, and get to be a part of this thing that with Jonathan Pryce playing Fagin that felt, as a kid, otherworldly. And it was staggeringly addictive. And in my head, I was like, I would love to do this, but you'll never, I don't know, I never believed that it was possible to do a job that you love and that you were passionate about. I thought that it's a hobby, acting, it's not a proper thing. But I sort of kept pursuing it through school and university, and it was always theatre at this point. I was very ill-educated in film. And when I was at university, it was the 400th anniversary of Twelfth Night. And Twelfth Night had been written or commissioned by this building in London called the Middle Temple Hall, which is this lawyer's inn in London. And they had commissioned Shakespeare to write Twelfth Night for them. And 400 years on, they commissioned the Globe Theatre that was then being run by Mark Rylance to put on a commemorative production. And it was going to be an all-male production, and Mark was playing Olivia, and they were looking for a young actor to play Viola. And so they asked around the universities, and I was so clueless. I went for an audition. I didn't really know Mark's work that well. I did an audition. Then I remember going away for a few days and then getting a call. I was sort of in a pub in Notting Hill, and I got a call saying, "Will you come now for a last audition?" And I was, 3/4 of the way through a bottle of wine. And I arrived at this audition with the great Mark Rylance, and he put on a rehearsal skirt, and I put on a rehearsal skirt, and we started playing a scene, and I was drunk, which was helpful. But then he took the book out of my hand, and suddenly I was having to sort of improvise Shakespeare.
terrifying.
I mean, looking back on it, it was probably one of the more terrifying moments of my life. But thanks to 3/4 of a bottle of red wine, I had no inhibition, and I was lucky enough in that moment to get cast in that. And that I always see as my training. At the Globe Theatre in London, they had a verse coach, they had a voice coach, and the director was incredibly rigorous, and I got to work and learn from great actors. And the thing that was extraordinary in that first job that I continue to love most about what we do is that was my first ever real professional job. And yet I was working with people who have been doing it for years. And yet there's a democratic quality to being on stage that you've all got to help each other. You know, you're only, and so rather than most industries, you kind of start and you sort of gently work your way up. You were there and you were treated as a partner, as a sort of dance partner, as a sparring partner from the word go. And I love that to this day. I love the community in acting. I love that I have friends who are sort of starting out and friends who are in their sort of 80s. And that sense of camaraderie was everything. I don't even know if I've answered your question. I've just been ranting on about that.
No, you gave us your origin story.
There you go, my origin story.
but it's
really don't love it. Yeah.
But to get it a moment in an actor's career when they're connected with that community and they maybe start to understand what it would look like to make a career of it and to find themselves as someone like Mark Rylance, who you then are with in the Trial of Chicago 7, which we'll see later. It's great, and I'm wondering, as a young actor, you sometimes encounter a lot of different theories of acting, or through studies or through mentors. Do you gravitate towards any of those specific theories, or was there one mentor who really instilled in you what it means to perform?
But I didn't go to drama school, and as I said, that first play felt like my version of drama school in some way. But through that play, I got a brilliant agent, a man called Dallas Smith, who took me on, and he started sending me to auditions, and some of those were film and television auditions, and I really had never seen a camera before or confronted that way of working, and I knew that having not trained, it was going to be about learning from your mistakes, and I was pretty meticulous with that, and have remained that way. I knew that I had to learn from my own mistakes, and I had to just be a sponge-like with the actors that I was working with. And I was very lucky very early on to work with some really staggering actors and directors, with whether it was Robert De Niro directing The Good Shepherd, through to watching Cate Blanchett on Elizabeth, The Golden Age, the sequel to Elizabeth. I remember very specifically with Cate Blanchett this moment where we were doing the sequel to Elizabeth, and she had been nominated for an Oscar and stunning in that first Elizabeth movie. And I'd come into set and I would see her there with her earphones in, just sort of gently saying these words in her accent. And I was sitting there going, wait, you've already nailed this. You've got this down. But you're seeing, one's so used to seeing the glamour of actors turning up on red carpets, and someone as extraordinary as her seeing that craft never ending, was a real key. Like, don't be seduced by this is all about. And so I tried to sort of glean elements from different actors, and not just in what their processes were, as I was trying to work out what mine might be, but also how they behaved in their lives. Because it's an odd life. Right. It is nomadic. It's circus-like. It's extraordinary, but also comes with its pitfalls. So I was really trying to imbibe all that, and to this day, I feel like whatever my process is, and it changes with each film. Yeah. But it is a collage of all those other actors I've worked with in some ways. So big moments in my life were, process-wise, were when I worked on a film called My Week with Marilyn, and Michelle Williams, when she was playing Marilyn Monroe, which was astonishing in that film, she wanted to approach it in the way that Marilyn had approached it, which was to surround yourself with practitioners. So she had a voice coach, she had a movement coach, which kind of took me back to the Globe way of working. But at that point, I was auditioning for things, and if I got the part, I did them. The idea of going, I need this, was beyond. And it was then when Theory of Everything came round, and I was cast in that, and our wonderful director James Marsh said to me on day one, he's like, Ed, by the way, just let you know, this lives or dies in your work. And I was like, okay. But what that gave me for once was actually the confidence to go, okay, I understand that, but this is what I'm going to need.
Right.
And I looked to Michelle's process then and went, I think I need a voice coach, and I definitely need someone to help me with the movement. And since then, I've worked that way, and I need time. Right. Because some actors, and some of my close friends are actors that can jump from job to job, and they can just hit the ground running. I'm an actor that needs a long runway. Yeah. And I realized that on Theory of Everything. And one of the great privileges of the success of that film was, and it's not always the case, but having sort of been able to be allowed that now when I work, just a bit of time, and I never take that for granted.
Before we get to the Theory of Everything, because I want to talk about that, but another film that I think audiences might have first heard your name was Les Miserables, 2012. You play Marius Pontmercy, and it's been 10 years since the film. Knowing a decade has passed, how do you think about that now, 10 years later?
I look back on that film with great fondness. I mean, it was eyes on stalks. Talk about learning process. Everywhere you looked was an extraordinary actor. But the wonderful thing about that film was, however brilliant and accomplished they were, they had never done this before. By which this sort of way that Tom Hooper, the director, had decided to work with having these earpieces and singing live, none of us had done that, and it was very leveling. And it was an extraordinary ride, that movie. It was it would be these days where, and I've just recently done Cabaret, this musical in London, and what musical theatre performers are capable of, their stamina, their physical capability, their vocal capability to do it day in and day out is dumbfounding. But even for the cast of students, most of whom had been in the West End show, many of whom had played Marius, which was utterly terrifying, even for them, they're used to doing one show a day, maybe two shows a day. And with this way of working, you were doing 30, 40 takes a day. And so it was an extraordinary strain on everyone, but we all felt like we were doing something, that hadn't really been mined before. And we were all learning on the hoof. It was quite, in that show there are also, each character has their moment, and you would generally hear that, after week one, and Annie Hathaway her hair had been shorn off, and you heard whispers around the set of, I dreamed. And you're like, wow, God, that's good. Can't wait. And then gradually it would mount, and it was like, have you heard Hughes? It's like, no. And it would mount. And my character's song was Empty Chairs and Empty Tables. And I was right at the end of the shoot. And by this point, I was so terrified that when we arrived to shoot it, firstly, you were just praying your voice was in okay nick that morning. And you just did not want to leave that set that day without having given your everything. Because that's the odd thing about film, is on stage you can go back and try and fix it the next day. Right. And that's the joy of theatre. That's why people go, how can you do this for months on end? Because you never get it right, and you're always aspiring for that. But on film, you never get it right, or you haven't found that idea in the moment, and then you have to go home that night and have the idea on the M4 as you're travelling into London and go, fuck, and then you have to wait to see the thing 12 months and go, fuck! So particularly with Les Miserables, when this was your big song, I remember Tom and I pushing each other to do take after take after take, also to get to a rawness emotionally, that this whole live singing thing was about finding the frailty in the voice as well as the strength.
Well, let's take a look. This is the moment. Empty chairs, empty tables. Let's roll a clip from the film.
Very strange to see. I've not seen that for a good decade.
So there's a common refrain that an actor pours everything they have into a role, and I think we can all agree that is that. You see that on screen. You see the emotion. You see the character thinking of the thoughts as they're speaking it, but you're also hitting technical, music. How do you balance all that? How do you do it?
Well, the thing about this that I remember what was interesting is going back to The Good Shepherd, the film that I did with which Robert De Niro directed. Robert De Niro has this process when he's filming, and it was the only film I ever shot on film. So you were very conscious of money, of how much the film cost, and you would do a take, and he would keep, and you'd add an emotional take, and then he would stop you and get you to go back and start again, and take the emotion that you had, the accumulation of that emotion, and repress that and fire that back into the start of the scene. And that's what we did here on this piece eventually. And of course, not all scenes allow that, because sometimes you have to be totally fine at the beginning of the scene. Whereas this guy Marius has been through pretty tragic circumstances at the top of that. So really, we did a ton of takes on this, and Tom, the director, was relatively happy after 5 or 6, but also because I'd heard all these other actors have these fucking great songs, and like, I let me keep going until I can't go anymore, because then at least when you're not happy with what you end up seeing, you know that you bled for it and you gave everything, and I think we did that there. We did push it pretty far. But I love that the frailty. I mean, technically it's appallingly sung, but it's got like there's the fragility. I think helps sell the song. Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like you're catching him after he's run a marathon, or after he's just done that 20 times. You can see it, and the result of that is that really fragile performance. You mentioned your way into theater was music. What type of role has music played in your life?
I think there's something that, I really enjoyed the experience of Les Mis for exactly that, the connection between emotion and music. There's something subliminal. There is an extraordinary thing that is indescribable that human beings connect to emotionally with music. Looking back at that, I remember that originally there's a very famous accompaniment to the beginning of Empty Chairs and Empty Tables, and I asked Tom if we could try it without, because I just didn't see how you weren't setting up. And here's the song, but finding that way from the spoken word into the sung word was a complex thing, but also a very relieving thing. The other thing about Les Miserables that I found fascinating was you were so bound by the technicalities of what the process demanded. So in order to have, they could only use one sound take. So that meant that they would have to shoot each scene with the wide shot, the close-up, all of it in one go. Do you see it? So they could intercut. And that's why some of the reasons you have these extreme angles or the choices, because if you wanted to do this live singing thing, you had to be able to cut a scene out of one take. But that's also a wonderful thing for an actor, because you you know that if you get to somewhere emotionally that you can't necessarily go back to, hopefully it will be found.
I want to move on to The Theory of Everything, because we were so lucky to have it here at the festival in 2014. There's so few people like Stephen Hawking who've made such an incomparable mark on our understanding of our universe and our place in the world. What responsibilities do you feel as an actor when you're stepping into the role of a real person like Stephen?
As an actor, when you get a role, there's this amazing moment when you get a part. And it never changes, it's electric, and it lasts about 3.5 seconds. And for me, and it's followed then by like vomit-inducing fear. With Stephen Hawking, it was that on steroids. It was, I can't believe I've got this opportunity to play this man with the help of his family, because it was based on Jane's book and the kids were behind it. But also, you know that you're going to be scrutinized, and ultimately you know that Stephen Hawking is going to watch that. And you have to do very little research with the late Stephen Hawking to know that he doesn't mince his words and he says what he thinks. But the fact that I knew that he would watch this film, and it's this, I mean, the same with The Good Nurse with Amy Loughran. It raises the stakes, and it just makes you work harder. And I've never been an actor who's been blessed with the facility to just wing it. I have to prep and put in the groundwork in order to be free to just play opposite the person. Right. And now that manifests itself in different ways. But in The Theory of Everything, a lot of it was about the not wanting to be inhibited by the different physicalities. Because we weren't shooting the film chronologically, you were going to be jumping between different moments in Stephen's life during a day of filming. I didn't want to be playing that moment in his ALS decline. So that's when I started, I took a leaf out of Michelle's book and worked with this amazing dancer called Alex Reynolds. And when I'd interviewed various movement coaches, I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't know what the process was to try and do it. So I would ask them, like, how would you go about doing this? And various people would say, well, try moving here and look like this. And Alex Reynolds, this amazing woman, said, imagine that your pelvis is Mercury. I was like, okay. She said, now shift that Mercury over to one side. And it was something internal, and it was somehow sort of emotional, oddly. And so she and I spent months going to motor neuron disease clinics and being let into people's lives and the families' lives, and trying to learn the specifics of Stephen's decline, but trying to learn those physicalities almost as dances, so that when you played the scenes on the days, you could easily shift into those physicalities. And the physicality wasn't the thing. Playing with opposite the brilliant Felicity Jones was the thing.
And those physicalities allowed you to also then capture the intellectual and the emotional.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hope. I was so useless at science. I remember there is a moment in The Theory of Everything in which it's the kind of, I suppose it's almost a sort of, it's like that scene in those intellectual academic dramas in which suddenly there's the epiphany of he's writing on a chalkboard, like all these kind of extraordinary things. And James was like, we're going to do that. I was like, okay, here's my cheat sheet. And I was like, I had all his theorems like written out just off camera. So like, yeah. I mean, a great actor would have memorized them, but that wasn't happening yet.
You had a little more to do in this movie, So let's take a look at a scene later in the film. This is the first time that Stephen meets Elaine Mason, who will then become his wife. So let's take a look. performance is so amazing. It really looks like we're watching Stephen Hawking and not Eddie Redmayne. What was it like to meet Stephen and to have his seal of approval on the film?
It's so strange to watch these things. I can't tell you what it is. It was, well, the answer is when I met Stephen, I didn't have the seal of approval. It was his ex-wife's book that the film was based on, and I don't think anyone wants their ex-partner telling their story. So he was very, there was a big question mark over whether he had read the script, and I met him, and I fell into all the pitfalls of trying to finish his sentences and not being comfortable in silence. But what you gained when you spent time with him was this dumbfounding charisma that just emanated from this man. And that was the thing that I was most intimidated by in the playing of him. Is he's these just rays of personality, of humour, of wit, just emanate from him. And you can do all the technical things, but then it's about finding the emotional side. What this film really also helped me with was this idea that it's not, as an actor, you're responsible for everything around the performance. So whether it was the costume sizes, like so that as he was getting skinnier, your collars would be larger, or making sure that you got to see the locations ahead of time so you could work out. There was a moment in that film when, you had Stephen there was a scene of him trying to climb the stairs and he couldn't, and then a couple of scenes later he was up in the bedroom. And actually, when you're living with ALS, you have to stay ahead of the disease, and so I said to James that we can't. It's not true to the diseases, and so we then moved the bed down to the kitchen, which was so. And that involved having seen the location shots. Mm-hmm. So, and it's something that's really stayed with me. And perhaps when you start out as an actor, you don't feel like you can ask for that access. But nowadays, with directors, I love that, being part of all of the I suppose the three dimensions around a character, the makeup design, all of that, and yeah.
Moving forward in your film work a bit, because I'm thinking of the trial of the Chicago 7, which was from 2020, and like you mentioned off the top, it didn't get to go on the festival circuit, and so I feel like it was one of the best films of that year, and you were part of that ensemble. There's a real kind of social and political dynamic to the character you played, Tom Hayden. But I want to hear you talk about what it's like to work as part of an ensemble in that group. Like in the true sense of the word, it was all of those pieces coming together to kind of lift all boats.
I adored it, and because that the essence of that film was it was all set in a courtroom, or a vast majority of it was, and there was no hiding from that. So you had all these brilliant actors, again, with completely different processes, all sitting behind these day in, day out. So you were you had, Sasha, who's an improviser by heart, but also doing an Aaron Sorkin script where you don't improvise, but he's like pushing Aaron's to always going, well, how about this idea? Always coming up with new ideas. To Jeremy Strong, who's extraordinary, who has done, encyclopedic research, but also wants to surprise in the situation. He wants to bring the anarchy of the character he's playing to the set. To Mark Rylance, who had genuinely given me a career, and who had played dice on set, and to Frank Langella, who would sit up as the judge, and we had been told on day one by Aaron. Aaron had come up to us and said, just to let you know, team, that Frank's asked not to meet you. He's going to have his own dressing room, and he's going to come in, and he just feels like it would be inappropriate. And we're like, everyone's process, cool. And then about a scene in, we were all having such fun between takes that he was like, okay, screw that. I'm going down to sort of join. So we would all sort of go and pay homage to the judge. But I really enjoyed that process and that film for many reasons. The first, because I'm a gigantic Sorkin fan. The second, because it took so long to come together. It was his passion project. I'd become attached after 15 years of them trying to get the film made to this part. And my dialect coach, Michael Buster, had come to London, and we'd worked on I was ready to move my family to Toronto. So it's just before Christmas. And I got a call from Michael saying, it's so sad to hear it's fallen through. I was like, what? I was like, called my agents. I was like, guys? And they're like, yeah, it's fallen through. So and then it was another 6 months later that and I've never been on a film where every day the fragility of filmmaking, even with that cast that was pretty formidable, like it must have not been deemed a kind of commercial, because you really felt like the film could fall through every single day. It was like proper sort of indie filmmaking. But of course that brought an excitement. And it also had that wonderful thing, which my dream as an actor is for when you're playing, for it to feel as real as it possibly can. Nothing about acting for film or on stage actually feels real. Like when we're on stage, I can see all you guys, I'm like, there's a lot of people there. When you're doing it on film, there's a ton of cameras right here. And there's always that moment when the camera rolls where a little bit of your sort of intestines kind of go, whoop, like, but on that film, because there were so many of us, the cameras were kind of roaming and you didn't know what was being caught. And that was lovely, because you don't feel that added pressure to that added scrutiny. Mm-hmm. And it was something that Tobias, our director, and Jodie on the Good Nurse did that I know we haven't got there, but which was extraordinary, was that the film was lit so darkly that I've never experienced something where you did not feel the presence of the camera. And I've never felt freer. And one of the things I was sort of, that I loved about making The Good. So it's interesting that, again, different directorial choices can allow freedoms. But no, the Trial of Chicago 7 was a hell of a ride. But also a different thing about playing a real person, right. In the sense that Aaron Sorkin said, I want you to play the script. I was like, should I get a wig? I don't look anything like Tom Hayden. He's like, no, we don't have... That's not this film. Play my version of Tom Hayden. And that was interesting, because that was the sort of antithesis of Hawking or of The Good Nurse. But I mean, with the acknowledgement that you're never playing facsimiles, or it's never a documentary. Or I was like, really? And he sort of wanted that. He wanted the words to be played rather than... Yeah.
Let's take a look. In this scene, your character Tom wants to be put on the stand to try to defend himself, but the group isn't sure that his testimony will hold up. Let's take a look.
It was such fun playing with Sacha on that, because we had done Les Miserables together, in which he was playing Monsieur Thénardier, and he'd been sort of, improvising like left, right, and centre with sort of, 19th century French hats and any prop he could get his hands on with Helena Bonham Carter. And then to get to work with him on this, in which it was kind of like there's a brotherly thing with Sacha, and that's how Sorkin saw this relationship. Like Tom is the fastidious and earnest and strong intentions, and Abby was the antithesis of that, and there was a kind of like a brotherly quality which I so loved playing with Sacha.
Yeah, this scene is so great because it brings you back to Mark Rylance as well, yeah. but to see the two opposing forces of you and Abby in the film, it really underpins the whole foundation of the film. And so I have a quote from Aaron Sorkin, because he said about you, there are a couple of things an actor can't fake. An actor can't fake being smart. An actor can't fake being funny. I needed Tom Hayden to have a dry sense of humor. I needed Tom Hayden to be smart. Eddie brought that in spades.
I love Aaron Sorkin, but I don't think I'm renowned for my humour. Like, I'll take it.
We love your humor.
Except all my intelligence for that matter. But like, whatever he says, yeah, just for the reason. Like, thanks, Aaron.
You talked about working, when you're working in a Sorkin script, you stick to the script. Are constraints good for you as an actor?
I love constraints.
Like, tell me where my box is and I will.
I'm always someone that I always liked an essay title. Quite often people go, "What part do you want to play?" And I'm like, "No, don't ask me that. Tell me what part I should play." Because I feel like I'm better at being given confines and then finding qualities within those and pushing those than I am at starting afresh. I wish I had the capacity for the imagination of coming up with things, but I remember in that way, when I was doing my week with Marilyn, I got a call from Michael Grandage, who's here in Tiff with My Policeman, a brilliant director, and I'd worked with Michael on a play called Red about Mark Rothko, and Michael, in the way that Michael does, called and said, so I was on set, and he said, "Eddie, I've got 2 words to say to you. You have to say yes or no." I'm like, "Okay." He goes, "Richard II." And I'm like, I don't know what he means. He goes, "Richard II." And I go, I'm so embarrassed that I've never read Richard II, because I'm sort of, in England, like, you're meant to have read every single Shakespeare ever. And that I go, yes. and in that phone call, committed to doing a production of Richard II. Because in the back of my mind, various other people in my life had always gone, Eddie, you should play Richard II. And so I was like, cool, like this Richard II guy, he must be cool. and then I read Richard II. Richard II's not cool. He's like, Richard II is a bit of a disastrous king, narcissist, incredibly fragile. So I was like, what? So generally, I like to be told what to play.
That's interesting. I'm curious then, the next role I want to talk about. One more quick stop before we talk about The Good Nurse. There was a Cabaret.
There was.
And there was a Master of Ceremonies.
Yeah.
And that's you.
You guys see it? Oh, wow.
Yeah, big still behind you here.
Nice. Yeah.
And so that role, the role of the Emcee is, one of the most coveted in musical theater, one of the most demanding. But it strikes me as a role that feels like there's a lot of freedom in that to interpret and to bring your own sense of who that person is and what they're meant to do within the play. What appealed to you about stepping into the role? And I know it's the second time you've done it, and so I wonder if you wanted to come at it from a different way this time.
Yeah, I mean, I'd done it when I was 17, when I was at school, and it had been something that I loved, and I didn't know why, but it was a moment actually that my parents went, "Oh, maybe you could do this acting thing," and they did not come, they weren't that keen, I think, for me to be an actor. We then did it at the Edinburgh Festival, and years later, the guys who'd run that venue at the Edinburgh Festival had become big producers in London, and it's about 6 years ago, and they said, "Would you ever consider doing it?" And I said, I would love to, but let me think about it. Because when I'd done it as a kid, I hadn't really researched it. I hadn't done and I went and I read around the part, and the Cabaret is based on Goodbye to Berlin by Christopher Isherwood. And there was then a play, I Am a Camera, that was based on that book. And then they made the musical, Candor and Ebb, with Hal Prince, that was Cabaret, that was based on I Am a Camera. But Hal Prince created this character called the Emcee that would just link the story together. So he was a sort of an abstract, really. They then made the play, the musical, which was very successful. Joel Grey, dumbfoundingly amazing, and then they made a film. And now the film, Bob Fosse didn't want any songs that weren't in the Cabaret to be in the movie. So it was only songs that took place in the Cabaret. So quite a few songs from the musical weren't used, and whole plot bits were changed, and new songs were added. After the success of the film, the musical then took on some of those songs. So you have this piece of work that is this extraordinary kind of collage of pieces. And at the core of it, you have this character that defies definition. And that is so thrilling and also terrifying. Because he doesn't, his role originally was just to weave the thing together. But when I thought about that, and then I had this idea of, not this idea, I basically was like, Jessie Buckley, will you play Sally Bowles? And I didn't know Jessie Buckley, but I just knew that she was one of the great talents and also this formidable voice. And she said yes, and we went on the journey together. And it was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. And it was that our take with Rebecca Frecknell, our director on the Emcee, was that this was someone who could shapeshift his way out of any sort of situation. He could exploit the community that he was in charge of, and then the second he was done with them, he could sort of disappear out into the world and align himself with whoever he wanted to be. And one of the reasons I think that you say it's one of the most heralded musicals, certainly for directors to direct and for actors to play in, is because it's one that can be pulled and stretched and interpreted in so many different ways. And it was a wonderful experience for me. And getting to work with Jessie, who's coming, are they coming here with Women Talking?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she is just one of not only the great actors, but one of the great human beings as well.
And as a point of connection to The Good Nurse, I read that one of the reasons why you were inspired to maybe step back onto the theater or step into Cabaret was working with Tobias Lindholm, your director on the film. What was it about the experience working with Tobias that inspired Cabaret, but also just working with him and how that?
Well, I think what had happened was that I'd got slightly. I've been working on big, gigantic, operatic, really enjoyable, like studio films in the Fantastic Beasts franchise, which I loved and I loved the crew of. But I had sort of, I don't know if I hadn't been stretching myself, I think, and of course you can stretch yourself within the confines of what those characters are. But when I started work with Tobias, I found a brother, really, someone whose outlook on the way he worked, he was consummate with script, he was consummate with process. He insisted on a month of rehearsal with Jessica and I, in which we would sit and talk. And so the script, Christy Wilson's Cairns script, which was brilliant to start with, we all worked together on, so that we had this document, that sounds kind of, but like this Bible for when we started that was our story, that we all knew we were telling the same story. And it's so rare in film that you have that. And what Tobias also did, I remember there was one scene that Jessica and I we were talking about this scene, and Jessica was like, I think that Amy would do this, and I was going, well, I think Charlie would do this, and we were they were very different points of view and Tobias was like, great, you can both have different points of view. That's allowed. Like this, it was and it was very liberating that to be given the freedom, and he instilled confidence, but he also did that thing that I think as actors you dream of, which is you trust the person enough that when they say they've got the scene, you believe that, but then they also allow you to then do another to push to the boundaries, to the extremes of things. So I came off The Good Nurse, and I knew I was going to be doing Cabaret, and I felt like The Good Nurse working with Jessica and Tobias, had reshifted something in me, had made me realize that perhaps I had got stuck in my ways, And so I went to clown school. Yeah, there you go. Yes, clown school. But there's an amazing school, because I'd never been to drama school.
Jacques Lecoq?
Lecoq, exactly. So there are various physical theatre schools in Paris, one of which is called Jacques Lecoq, who was a great physical theatre practitioner. And he is no longer around, but many of his students are, and they teach in this beautiful, it's a 19th century boxing ring in Paris. And I signed up for this course, and I said to my wife, I was like, "Baby, I think it's all right if I go to Paris to do a sort of physical theatre course on the theatre of the absurd." And she's like, yeah, I was like, "It's for Cabaret." And she's like, "Okay." And, anyway, so she was like, "Are you sure you're not just going on a holiday to Paris to like sort of go?" And I went over there, and it was students. You had to be a practitioner, so you had to be working professionally, but aged. The students were from aged 18 to kind of 60, from all over the world. And on day one, you stood up and you had masks and you were doing mask work and stuff, but there were these two doyen French teachers, and you instantly had to improvise. So you had to throw any sense of ego or self-consciousness like out the window and do these improvisations with foreign actors, in French, and it was a trial by fire. And I remember sort of standing up and doing my first thing, and the teacher being like, "No, ça marche pas." Like, so I was like, "Oh God!" Like, big mistake. You're a star. Anyway, let's go home. But it was brilliant because it very quickly, everyone getting up was being scrutinized, but you were learning from other people's mistakes, and I just wanted to free myself again a bit from any of these. I never meant them to be. They weren't conscious things that are put up, but you sort of have created somehow, I think, over the years, these different barriers, and I came back, and I really wanted to know that going into the rehearsal room for Cabaret, that I was totally free, and I did that, and it was an amazing thing, and it was just a reminder to myself that like don't stop learning, because that's where you become stale and frankly lose a love of it.
That's so fascinating to hear, because I think many people think, when you quote unquote make it, you won an Oscar for best actor, that that you would just get a part and keep going, but to hear that you're going back to school to learn the art of clown, and I think it's really, really great to hear that learning is part of the process, and not just learning about your characters, but learning about how to do something different with your body or your voice. And I read for the Good Nurse that you and Jessica went to nursing school and learned what it is to be a nurse.
I'm a shocking nurse, a really bad nurse. We did. So we had this amazing guy called Joe, and we went for 2 weeks to nursing school, and it was like regressing to being an 18-year-old again. I was sort of biting my pen, leaning back on my chair. Jess is, a brilliant mind, and I'm also renowned for being a really shoddy prop actor. I'm really bad with props. Because when you do takes again and again, you have to do exactly the same thing with the props, and I can't. I'm a sort of continuity nightmare. But I had to do a lot in the movie of effortlessly putting in IV tubes and pulling off things, and I was spending. And I would have to come into set like really early in the morning with this sort of dummy of a sort of medical dummy. And Tobias would sort of find me there trying to sort of do this without being sort of looking sort of weird and self-conscious whilst doing it. But it was, and Jess was much more effortless with it. But again, it's so interesting about all of us in life. You know what your skills are, what your skills aren't, and those things where some people just have to work harder at specific things. And it transpires with the nursing props. Yeah, you don't want me anywhere near you in a crisis.
For those who haven't seen it, let's take a look at a clip in this scene. Charlie is meeting with his friend and colleague Amy, who's trying to draw information out of him about what he might have done to patients while detectives listen in. So let's take a look. In this scene in particular, but even a few moments after this scene, there's a really striking moment where you look up at Jessica, and for the first time, I think the audience sees a different side of Charlie, and it's really just with a slight change in your eyes and your facial expression. It's really striking as a viewer as well. And so I'm wondering how you interpreted Charlie's inner turmoil and what decisions you made to manifest that physically at certain moments where we see that darker side of him come out.
Well, so it's so interesting you said about the eyes in that moment, because the real Amy is an extraordinary woman. And when I spoke to her in prep for this film, like she and Charlie were incredibly close friends. And she spoke about his kindness, his empathy, his sort of humor, his self-deprecating like wit. And there were only a couple of times that she ever met, how she describes it, as a disassociated, a different person. And one of them is this moment that's just beyond where the clip ended. And she talks about one eye drifting off, and Charles Graeber in the book The Good Nurse, and he spent a lot of time with Charles Cullen as well, talks about this one drifting eye. And so it was an odd thing, this film, because you were playing someone who was authentically kind and generous and in the moment empathetic, but there was this other side and this other character emerging, and when it did emerge, there was a confidence and an arrogance, and it really was a completely different person. And it took a while for me to really take that on, because I couldn't believe that it's an odd thing to see, that like a totally different human being. But you could see that human being in the interviews with Charlie that you see now. You could see a sort of confidence and an arrogance at some of the moments when he was in court. You know, there was a moment in court where the families of the people some of the families of the people he had murdered were there, and the judge was there, and this man who was in one state gentle was screaming this mantra at the judge so violently that he ended up having to be gagged and bound in court. And so it was about how you found those colours and tried to sort of weave them in. And a lot of that, honestly, was about surprising Jessica. Jess and I sparring off each other, trying to, I suppose, surprise each other.
Yeah, you and Jessica have such electrical kind of chemistry in the film, and the characters depend on each other in real human ways. Like, her character has a health issue, and so Charlie is very important in her life, and you can see the ways in which Charlie needs someone. How do you build that dynamic? Does that come in rehearsal or discussion, or just getting it up on its feet?
I think a bit of everything. I mean, I'd known Jess socially in this sort of very strange way in which people in sort of actors do sometimes, in which you kind of meet on a sofa at James Corden, or you meet behind the scenes at the Golden Globe where you have to present together, and then you have the piss ripped out of you as you're presenting. So you've been through sort of humiliating experiences. You've been through this, and I adored her, and I think she is a staggering sort of talent, but I also really liked her. And one of the things, and you never know this when you work with friends, like, you hope it's going to be wonderful, but you never know. Like, I have friends who are wonderful human beings who, maybe aren't such fun to work with. I don't know. But what was wonderful about Jess and I is we shared a process, and we only found that out through working with Tobias, and Tobias, conducted that process, which is we like to do a shitload of research in our own vacuums. I work with my dialect coach with the this Alex, the dancer I was talking about earlier. Just the detective work is how Jess puts it, is part of the joy of what we do. Beyond the film, just into like as a human being, scouring into the depths of stories is part of what we love. And so for this film, for me, it was reading Charles Graeber's book, but getting all the footage we could of the interrogation scenes, finding as much like literary description of Charlie. And Jess would do the same, and then we would go and talk with Tobias, put all of our ideas together, and then throw it all away. So that when a scene like this became jazz, basically, or it felt like it for us, but it in different takes, that you were just playing off each other and really listening. And this thing for actors, all you have to do is listen. But it's bloody hard to listen when there are like cameras and thingies and thingies and thingies. Like you're playing your character, and that actually sometimes just to let all of that go. For me, you have to have done so much of the prep work so that can sit in the foot of your belly. Doesn't make sense.
You went to nursing school.
Yeah, exactly. Oh fuck. And then you can throw all that away.
Right. Well, I think what the three of you achieve together is just incredible. There's a lot of true crime out there, but the film really asks you, I think, to lean in, to pay attention more, and what we saw in that scene too, the humanity with which you find in Charlie, knowing what he's done, that he still was a 3D human person, and to put all that on screen, I think the results are what we saw last night. I wanted to ask about that question of responsibility, which I asked about Stephen Hawking. When you're playing someone like Charlie, who's done these horrendous acts, is there a different responsibility in stepping into this role about just knowing the context of everything that happened?
Well, I mean, I feel like a sort of ferocious responsibility with every part you play. Like you're massively protective of characters that you're playing, but in this case, there was the responsibility of the film itself. Like, this is a true story, and it was incredibly important to us that this was not the glorification of a serial killer, that it didn't have the salacious quality that sometimes true crime films can have. But the second I read the script for this, Christie's script, there was none of that in it. It was a piece about a hero, Jessica's character, Amy, a single mum hero who managed to accomplish things that broken systems couldn't. And at its core, it was about how violence could be confronted by compassion. And that's what Jessica did so extraordinarily, and it's what the real Amy did. You know, really understanding nowadays with systems and the world in the state that it's in, that systems are made up of individuals, but also within that, when you're a cog in a machine, you can lose that sense of responsibility or hide from that sense of responsibility. But actually, it is the individual that can change things.
Yeah, the film does such a great job at showing that hospital system, that bureaucracy, that, like you say, made up of individuals, but a larger kind of ecology all its own. I'm going to throw to audience questions in just a minute, so if you have a question, think of it, and we're going to circulate microphones throughout the audience. In a role like this, do you feel like part of your job as an actor, as a storyteller, is to help uncover some meaning or suggestion about what could have motivated Charlie? I mean, we don't know for sure why he did what he did, but is part of the journey for you about maybe inching us towards some possibilities?
Definitely the part of it in the research of the film was the looking for the why. But when I took this part on, I knew that I was going to be searching for that why, but I had to acknowledge that I wasn't going to find it. Charlie's background was, which is only touched upon in the movie. I mean, this man, his father died before his first birthday. He had many elder siblings, so he was the youngest. He was abused probably by one of his sister's boyfriends, who he then tried to kill age 7, then tried to kill himself age 7. He went to when he was 15 years old, his mother, who he was very close to, died in a car crash when he was the first person to arrive at the hospital, and they'd lost her body. And when they found the body, it was all uncovered and disrespected. He then passed all the psychiatric tests to get through to join the Navy, and he worked in submarines. And I only put this in parentheses because I don't think it's apocryphal because it's in Charlie Graeber's book, but that he was found in the submarine with his finger over the button for the Poseidon missiles, before he was then expelled from the Navy. And after all of that, he then went and trained to be a nurse. And the fact that and he was in and out of psychiatric units. The fact that sort of person was ever allowed near vulnerable people. And by the way, when he trained to be a nurse, it was at the hospital that his mother had died at. So that there was always a slight sense for me, like the way it's asked in this film is, I did it. When he's asked why, he goes, because they didn't stop me. And I always wondered, I don't believe there's one motivation, one reason. Amy says he has a dissociative disorder. This is to, but was it something connected to that, the way that his mother had perhaps been treated? But you try and take all of that in, and then hopefully the audience takes what they can from it.
And all of that colors your performance, which we see that.
Very little of that you actually see in the movie, by the way. Now you have the bridged notes.
So we're going to go to your questions now. So get some microphones out in the audience if they are roaming. I think we have one question over here. Yep, go ahead. Oh, the microphone's just making its way.
Hi. Many of us here saw the screening last night. Amazing.
Thank you.
You can ask her either or of these questions because you might not want to answer either.
Right.
Okay. First one, do you mind sharing anything that was going through your own mind as the credits rolled? Think about that one. Second question, I'm very curious if the staff and crew had any awareness of the very similar Wettlaufer case here in Ontario.
I don't know about the Wettlaufer case, so I'm not going to speak on that. What went through my mind last night, honestly, was I'd only met Amy, the extraordinary Amy, via Zoom, because it was the pandemic when we were filming. And I got to meet her in person over these past couple of days. And really, my headspace last night was watching her watch this film, and how complex that must be to see an interpretation of your story. And of course, it's never a documentary and it's different, but then also with this audience. I mean, in this setting, my head was, I was all over the place, honestly. It was pretty emotional, and it was extraordinary to watch her, because she doesn't in any way deem herself as a hero. She says anyone would do this, but what she risked was extraordinary, and to watch everyone, jump to their feet in recognition of what an astonishing thing it was she did, and how many lives she must have saved. Was pretty overwhelming.
Where's the next question with the microphone? Over here.
It's nice to see all your faces.
Nice to see yours.
Go ahead with the microphone there.
So first, I'd like to say that your performance was phenomenal. Like the way you had a dichotomy between the first character and like the second, and like putting that all into one. It was just beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so my question is, I know Jessica Chastain at the beginning of the premiere last night, she said that she had to create a certain empathy for Charlie's character. And I was just wondering, how did you balance that of creating an empathy for your own character while also putting that boundary of like, this is a murderer and this is someone that deserves to be in jail?
So I acknowledge that from the outset, but that's not helpful when you're trying to play that person. I really took Amy's words to heart that she had found him incredibly funny and kind, and he often would use this self-deprecating humor about how screwed up his life was. To like, he's like, I'm a mess. You know, it's a fucking nightmare, and like everything, like in order to pull people close, and that was a pattern that he repeated again and again. So I also had to invest in the fact that they were different people. And as I was saying before, that took a moment, and it took Tobias's encouragement, really, to expose the moments when he wanted to see that other side. So, yeah. Does that answer your question, sort of? Ish.
Okay, there's a question over here on that side.
Hello.
Hello.
I just have a question. When you when you're working on a character and then you approach a scene, do you find that you normally memorize your lines first, and then once you've got them memorized, you play around with the scene, or do you find that you don't memorize and then you just kind of find your place in the scene and then you memorize?
Brilliant question. Again, like I'm not one of those actors that can slip into dialects like that. I have to put the work in, and again, that's very technical work that I have to do for quite a long time beforehand. So I really have to learn the lines, and that's why I love a secure script, and that's a rare thing. But it was something that I would say to our director, like, I need a script like that. I don't want new pages on the day, and ideally. But generally I do tend to be a line learner. Jess, on the other hand, she would be learning her lines, but that's also because of my memory. I have a really, I can't learn things quickly. I also can't retain things. Whereas Jess, and I love that about process. Like different actors, some people want to learn it last minute, so it's in their short-term memory, so they're looking to find it. I find I can occasionally do that, and something new and fresh will come. The worst thing is being halfway between that and knowing it really well. Like, I'm okay at blind reading scripts, but the second I've sort of read them a few times, then you go into this really shoddy place, and only until you've done a load of work can you then emerge again out the other side.
And there's one over here.
Hi, Eddie. First of all, I like to say I just saw The Good Nurse just like 4 or 5 hours ago, and it was amazing. Oh. You were phenomenal in it. We talked about a lot of your movies today, but what we didn't talk about was The Danish Girl, and I'm like, it was amazing. Like that's one of my favorite movies of yours. So I'd like to know, like, if there was, what was it like for you to play that part, and like, if there's like any scene in it like that was difficult for you to film, maybe, and maybe if there's any stories you like to share from the set.
Yeah, I mean, it was an extraordinary experience making that film, and I have made so many friends from it. It was also a complicated film to make, because I was thinking about it actually when we were talking about Cabaret and the genesis of Cabaret. You know, Lily and Gerda's story, they were two extraordinary real people. Lily then wrote this book, Man into Woman, which people think she probably wrote, but may have then been written up by someone else to sort of by a publisher to sensationalize, and that came out in the 30s. So that was a resource. And then you had The Danish Girl, written by David Ebershoff, that was written, 15 years ago, that was 3 steps away from the truth. Then there was our script, Lucinda Coxon's script, which was a take on David's book, that was a take on the thing, and so when I made that film, I was sort of aware that we were telling a version that was various steps away from the truth. And so I just had to, I didn't look anything like Lily. It was, a lot of these scenes had been created that were, and some elements of the relationship with Gerda that were very different to what perhaps their real relationship was. So I look back on it going, it was complex because I was trying to find a truth in something that was a shifting thing. Does that make any sense? But the process of making it, the people who I got to meet, members of the trans community, some of whom are very, very close friends of mine now, and I had an extraordinary time working with another formidable actor in Alicia Vikander, and in another chamber piece, and I enjoy that so much. I found many elements of it hard. The thing that I found most hard was that I never believed there weren't enough scenes of Lily being Lily. It was all about her transition to becoming Lily, but there were never enough, I didn't think, in which she had expressed her true joy and brilliance and eccentricity that was sort of there. And there are many things which I would do differently.
Time for one more question, and does someone have a microphone?
I'm over here.
Hello, hey.
Hello, Eddie. I'm a massive fan. I love what you do. I love everything about your performances, especially on screen, obviously. But I would like to know, if you had a chance to step behind the camera, would you ever take a directorial role?
That's a very good question. If you ask basically any of the directors I work with, I'm a bit like, I definitely have opinions. And some directors, like Tobias, are very generous at accepting those opinions. Some directors are like, shut up and get back in your box. I would love to direct one day. I really try, and I was talking to Namdi, who's in The Good Nurse, about this, who's recently directed his first thing, and he was telling me how when he was making The Good Nurse, he was really looking out for Tobias's and learning from him. And I really do try to learn from the directors I work with. I've not found the right thing. And I sometimes I worry that I'll never find the right thing, and that's a fear thing. But at some point, I've got to stop meddling and actually just do it myself. So I am gently on the lookout for something, but I would want it to be something that was really in my sort of blood, I suppose, not something that you just sort of jump on at the end of. Cool question, though. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Eddie, thank you for bringing the film to Toronto. Thank you for today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Eddie Redmayne.